After multiple days of negative 20-degree temperature, I was anxious to get out and enjoy some much milder, fresh mountain air. I went to a local canyon, knowing that something had happened when the weather had warmed up. A lot of the snow had melted, leaving behind ice formations, a perfect subject to photograph in the waning hours of the day. I grabbed my gear and hit the local trail, anxious to see if there was something interesting to find. Well, what is going on, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. I'm here at a local spot near home now that we're on the other side of a negative 20-degree deep freeze, and I'm hiking along what should be a pretty cool trail along this creekside. And the snow's been melting, but it's leaving behind a lot of cool ice, so I'm hopeful that I can find some interesting ice formations along this creek as I continue up the trail. So that's the plan for today, and hopefully we get a little bit better light here soon. Well, unfortunately, I think I'm going to strike out on this trail. The only option really is to climb up into that cave using technical rock climbing equipment, which I'm not a climber. And also, because of all the freezing and thawing of the ice on the ground, it's all this misshapen, uneven ice patches everywhere with technical rock that I'd have to climb to get up onto this mountainside. So I'm going to double back to where I started this hike just a minute ago and head on a little bit further up the road. It sure is a really cool trail. If I were more of a rock climber, maybe it would be my thing, but I don't think there's much photography to be had up this direction just yet. So hang tight, I'm going to hit the road, find a better spot. Well, despite having grand plans of hiking down along the edge of the frozen creek through the canyon, the trail quickly disappeared, as you saw, up into basically some rock climbing only sections. And whoa, gosh, woo. Even on this section, it's still extremely icy, as you can see behind me. So I'm taking it nice and easy and working my way along the edge of this trail while the mountains and clouds overhead are just starting to catch some nice light. So slight change in plans, but maybe once the ice melts a little bit further, I can actually go and photograph along that canyon. So I'm gonna focus and get through some of these icier sections and find a good view of the mountains out over this way. Well, as you can see behind me, I finally made it to an overlook, and behind me there's this mountain face with a lot of these diagonal lines forming in the side of the cliff. So I'm probably going to put my 100 to 400 on and zoom in on one of these tiny little pine trees that are just barely growing in the creases of the rock. So we've got some great warm reflected light from the clouds overhead as they're beginning to glow at sunset. So I'm going to set up and see if I can find an image or two before the light begins to fade. And I've got to hike back down that icy monstrosity back to my car. Okay, so this is the composition that I have set up. There's this one tiny little pine tree that's growing in this diagonal formation of the rock, along with a few of these sharp edges, and then a few of the more mature pine trees behind it. And I really like the way that that tiny little pine tree seems to be standing all on its own. And if I hide the info on the screen, it really seems to be bucking the trend where all of these taller, more mature pine trees are set up further into the valley. So we're getting some nice warm reflected light that's adding some dynamic, highlights and shadows to these jagged rock faces. The only problem being, if I zoom in, you'll see there's quite a bit of wind blowing this tree around. So I've got everything set up, manual focus, and focus right in on this tree, nice and sharp. And I'm set at a wider aperture. I'm currently set at f5, so that the second that there's a break in this wind, I can take advantage of a slightly faster shutter speed, which right now is calculating it 1/5 of a second. So not enough to stop this motion in the tree as it is right now, but enough that if I get just the smallest break in the wind, I'll be able to capture this scene still nice and sharp. So it looks like the wind might be dying down right now. Almost. Perfect. We'll see how this one turns out. So zooming in on the image, it looks like a small amount of motion blur in a few of these branches, but all in all, everything else looks really sharp. So I'd say that this one will probably be the best that I get tonight, given the constant wind that we're having to deal with. So I'll post this image right now. Be sure to let me know in the comments below what you think. So I found another composition that I like, thankfully, without having to move more than a few inches. Just a bundle of 2 or 3 small pine trees set against this ever so slight ledge on the cliff face, with some of the jagged peaks below and different color and texture in the rocks above it. So again, I'm running into the same problem where there's quite a bit of wind up on that side of the cliff today. So I'm gonna wait for a break in the wind if I'm able to, which that might have been it right there. And hopefully this one turned out better than the last scene, which I actually think it did. So there I go, saying something before I should have. That was easier than I thought it was going to be. So I hope you like this image. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. I personally really like the warm reflected light and these jagged peaks jutting up, just showing the scale of the mountainside. And if I zoom out, you can see just how dramatic of a scene this really is. Okay, I think I found my final composition for this location before I decide to head back down the trail and get nice and warm. You can see this pine tree seems to be growing on an absolute sheer cliff face. If I zoom in, I don't even know how that is physically possible. So I think that is really interesting to photograph. Unfortunately, I'm not getting quite the composition that I'm looking for. I'm getting a lot of this sky in the top right hand corner when I zoom out any more than 400 millimeters. And so what I think I'm going to do is set up the composition so that I can get this interesting rock that's falling apart to the left, this pine tree that's clinging on somehow, and a lot of these diagonal shapes to the top right of the frame. It's also anchored a bit by this set of pine trees down in the lower right-hand frame too. I think what I'm going to do is use this as the composition, wait for a break in the wind yet again, and then what I'll do in the final stages is just crop down this top piece ever so slightly, make it more of a 4:3 aspect ratio once everything's all said and done. So I think this will be what I end up using, and manually focus right in on the tree. You can see the wind yet again causing me fits. At f5.6, since I'm zoomed all the way into 400 millimeters. Now I'm just waiting for a break in the wind so I can get a 1/4 second exposure with minimal motion blur. I think that might just do it. So I will post this image right now. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. Well, all of that beautiful reflected light on these jagged peaks behind me has finally faded. So now I'm navigating down a very icy trail, nice and slow, making my way back to the car. As you can see down below me, this trail is absolutely, completely iced over with nothing to stop me from tumbling down into a bunch of those trees and bushes and stuff down that way. So I'd much rather, that not happen.
Despite the mid-hike change of plans, I was actually really satisfied with the way the photos from this afternoon turned out. I hope you enjoy the images of these pine trees clinging to the edge of the cliff, overlooking the canyon that I'd originally intended to hike through. Thanks as always for watching, and I look forward to seeing you around in the next one.